Hey guys, rocking out my old 90s music. Okay, so this is Professor Kerwin. Let's get started on week 3 online Anthro 111 lab assignments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show kind of the week 3 page I created so you kind of know what's going on. And then I'm going to get started with part 1 of the lab 7 exercises. So let's share screens here to my browser. There we go. That's what I want to see. So week 3. So in this 100% asynchronous class, the following assignments have been assigned for this week. Don't forget to do the week 3 discussion. That is a way we can have class participation and people helping each other with the labs, albeit online. And oh, look, a typo, awkward. Week 3. I must have been I was really tired when I did that. And so one thing I want to bring to your attention that I made almost everything due on Saturday, July 3rd. Why Saturday, not Sunday? So Saturday, not Sunday. The reason is Sunday is a national holiday. It's Independence Day, 4th of July. Monday is a national holiday for businesses and government institutions. So what I did is I had everything due on July 3rd on Saturday before the national holiday, but I made the assignments available until late Tuesday, July 6th. And I did that because I want you guys to, be with your families and take care of each other and not have to spend the 4th of July Sunday working on this lab. So I want you to be incentivized to get it done early on Saturday if possible. But if you can't, I understand. Many of my students are parents and they have small children. And being a parent myself, one thing you realize after you have your first child is that your time's not your own anymore. You're living basically for somebody else. So for my other students who are not parents, you typically have more freedom when you're not at work. That means you get home, you're tired, you can go sleep. You don't have to stay up and, take care of children. So, but everyone's situation is different. I have students who are working 2 jobs. As a past student has said, going to college is a struggle, so I don't have to struggle so hard later, right? So we get through college, so we get our degrees and our education, so we can be professionals and we can have more control of our time later. So you're on the right track. Hang in there. So there's 2 lab assignments for week 3. Lab 7, which is the online version of exercise 7, human osteology postcranial skeleton. That's due on July 3rd. The second lab, if you have time to get through it, is lab number 8. Lab number 8 is the online version of exercise 9, primate classifications. This is a lab on how to how to classify a living organism and why primates are classified in different groups or categories, and based on the differences between different species assigned to different categories. Or in other words, what's the difference between New World monkeys and Old World monkeys? What's the difference between primates and non-primate mammals? What's the difference between apes and monkeys? Stuff like that. And the answers are in my slides saved as a PDF file. So on this discussion, part 1, ask a question or offer an answer to another student about a lab exercise. And then part 2, after your initial post, just respond to one of your classmates with either something you have in common with that person, or share a cute photo, funny joke, image, sound, or I should say, or answer one of their questions about a lab. Yeah, or answer students question about lab exercise or other thing Pierce college related. How's that? So I want to add that. I just thought of that. I'm like, yeah, because someone might have questions about a quiz or something. So that's it for week 3. 2 labs, 1 lab that's due by Saturday, but you get a little extra time if you're unable to complete it. And so let's get started on part 1 of lab 7. Lab 7 is the online version of exercise 7 in the lab manual for Anthro 111. You're probably wondering, what about lab 8? Because I saw that you skipped from lab 7, exercise 7 to exercise 9. We're skipping lab 8. We're skipping exercise 8 in the lab manual. So exercise lab 7 correlates with exercise 7 in the lab manual. Lab 8 correlates with exercise 9 in the lab manual. Whew. Okay, so for part 1, I'm going to go over exercise 7.1, getting to know the postcranial skeleton. So what's that about? Well, first thing is go to your lab manual, go to page 69. And here's a list of postcranial bones that you need to know for this exercise. I numbered them, vertebral column and so on. And then it has a question on page 69, which in the online directions on Canvas, which you should always read first, I said, don't worry about that, just skip it. But I'll give you the answer. It's an interior view. Is the answer to the question, what side of the body is this? And to the second question, right after, male or female, female. How do I know that? Because I'm attributing the female sex to the shape of the pelvis, and I'll go into differences between male and female pelvi. I guess that would be the plural for pelvises. Pelvi? Plural for femur is femora. All these Greek and Latin based words. Okay, so your job on page 70 is to label each bone. We'll begin with number 1. Tell me you know what that is. You're like, whoa, the parietals? What part of it? Okay, so look in this list. What does it say? Postcranial bones. Well, it's a skull. So there you go. That's the skull. The number 2, it points to a bone right there. That's a collarbone. What's the scientific name for it? And I will now begin my lecture slides, and we will go over every bone that has a box to it. I'll give you a clue. This one, it begins, the scientific word for it begins with the letter C as well. All right, so here are my lecture slides, and let's get started. All right. So it's typical for in anatomy to divide the skeleton into different sections. So we had the skull last week in dentition, and there's the axial postcranial skeleton. There's the intermembral sets, if you will, the long bones, all kinds of stuff. So let's begin. So overview question number 2 that asks, what are the main bones of the axial postcranial skeleton? That'll help you complete the labeling exercise on page 70 of and by the way, the page numbers is in the 6th edition of the lab manual for Pierce College. For LA Valley College, their page numbers are different because we're using the 8th edition at LA Valley College. But the exercises are almost exactly the same. All right, I'm back. I'm gonna get a little bit of caffeine here. Let's do this. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Sorry, grew up with Star Wars. Okay, so it's really important that you guys review the directional terms of the human skeleton before we get started, or things won't make sense. So what is the word for above or top? Superior. What is the word for below? Inferior. What is the word for in the middle or the center line, like the middle of the skull, or the center facing direction of the proximal side of the femur, proximal end of the femur? Medial, M-E-D-I-A-L. What is the outside sides of, let's say, the pelvis? Lateral. So lateral means side, medial is center, front, the word for front is anterior, the word for back is posterior. And then in regards to long bones are the bones of the arms and legs. The bones closest or in proximity to the center of your body, or heart, if you will, are called proximal end of the long bones. The end of the long bones that's most distant from your heart are distal ends. And then there's dorsal, which is the back of quadrupeds or marine animals. And then ventral, which is the front of quadrupeds or marine or aquatic animals like fish. All right. And then here are two pictures of two individuals with those terms written out. So medial, so especially when we're looking at femurs, femur's a long bone in legs. There's the part of the femur called the femoral head that articulates with the pelvis at the acetabulum. That would be the medial side of the femur. And then the, the side toward the outside of the body is the lateral side of the femur. So make sure you get those medial, lateral, anterior, posterior, superior, inferior directions down. All right, so what are the main bones of the axial postcranial skeleton? So the axial skeleton is, think of an axle on the car. So the axle of the car is like a structure that the wheels go around, okay? So if you have like little Matchbox cars when you were a kid, it was literally like a little plastic or metal bar, and then the little wheels would go around on it, right? So think of the wheel is on its side. So the axle would be the vertebral column, and with the head spinning around and the chest cavities, ribs spinning around, if you will. So 6 major parts of the axial skeleton: the skull, and then the hyoid bone. The hyoid bone is a small bone that floats just on the interior side of your cervical vertebrae. Cervical vertebrae are in your neck. Cervix means small. So your smallest vertebrae in your neck. And then you have the clavicle, left and right. Clavicle are, on this schematic, it says it's not part of the axle, but we're going to talk about the clavicle. We're talking about the scapulae, or scapula and singular, left and right, 1 sternum, and then the ribs. We have 12 pairs of ribs. So 12 times 2 is 24. So let's get started. So the hyoid. A hyoid is a U-shaped bone that supports the tongue muscles in the throat. It's based on the ancient Greek word of hyoidesis. I think that's how you say it. Hyoidesis. Kind of faked that. Did you get that? Which means upsilon-shaped U bone. So it looks like the letter U, or upsilon, I guess, in the Greek alphabet. So the hyoid bone is not on that drawing of a skeleton on page 70. So moving right along, but you need to know we have one. Why? Hyoid bone is one of the, an important way to tell if someone was strangled to death or hung by the neck until they died. In forensic anthropology, it's an important bone when determining the cause and manner of death in a murder scenario. All right, so the first important bones to label, and it'll be number 2, what I wrote number 2, or the second from the top box on page 70, and that is the clavicle. So C-L-A-V-I-C-L-E, and it's the collarbone. You have 2 of them. A way to remember the name for clavicle is it begins with the letter C, like the common name for it in English, collarbone. It's kind of at the collar of your shirt, so clavicle. It articulates medially with the sternum. Remember what medial means? Middle. And laterally with the scapula. The medial side that articulates with the manubrium, or top part of the sacrum, is round, flat, round and rough. Like it's like a little, it's round and rough. The lateral side that articulates the scapula is flat and smooth and kind of points upward or to the back. So the protuberance is on the inferior side. The protuberance is on the inferior side, or the side on the back. So you have two ends of a clavicle. You have the sternal end, because that articulates with the sternum, and the top part of the sternum is called the manubrium. So the sternal end is in the medial side, right? So this is the sternal ends. And then you have the acromial end. The acromial end articulates with the scapulae. So acromial end. All right. All right, so moving right along. We, on page 70, it asks you on the third box down, it asks you the name of that bone, and that's in the list, and that's a sternum. S-T-E-R-N-U-M as in Mary. So that's a sternum. And let's go here. Sternum. So the sternum is that center necktie shaped bone that articulates with the ribs. There's three parts to the sternum. The manubrium, it's a top flat and fish shaped. It's based on the Latin word for fist or hand, like manu, which is similar to mano. How do you say? I always get confused between the Spanish word for monkey and the Spanish word for hand. Mono? Or mano? I think mono is monkey, but I could be wrong. All right. Sorry, guys, I digress. The middle part is called the sternum. So this is a little confusing, but this whole structure here in the medial part of your rib cage is called the sternum. But if you want to look at pieces of it, the top piece is a manubrium. The middle piece is also called the sternum. And there's a little bit of cartilage down here called the xiphoid process. And it's bottom flat and pointy. And if you ever have to give anyone CPR when you're trying to resuscitate them, it's kind of easy to break that, especially an elderly person. So you gotta be careful, because that would be very painful to break that little thing off. All right, so let's clear that. And okay, so let's move right along here. And my screen just froze, and this is not good. Okay. And show. All right. Okay, so I'm back. Sorry about that. Try to do this again. So my internet's going in and out, so I think I'm going to stop annotating the slides using the Zoom tool. So looking at page 70, the next box is the rib cage. So we have 12 pairs of ribs, and we have true ribs, false ribs, and floating ribs. So our true ribs attach directly to the sternum. They go from the thoracic vertebrae and they connect directly to the sternum. The false ribs, 8 through 10, attach to the cartilage, which in turn connects to the sternum. And then you have floating ribs. So that's ribs 11 and 12. and they have no interior attachment. Interior means front, so they just kind of float. For this class, all you have to remember is we have 12 pairs of ribs, or 24 ribs total. Super easy. Okay, I'm back. A little warm today. We don't have air conditioning, but it's okay. We're gonna get through this. All right. So ribs. All you need to know for this class is we have a pair, 12 pairs of ribs. There you go. So the vertebral column, we have 3 types of vertebrae: cervical, thoracic, and lumbar. And so the cervical is based on ancient Greek or Latin word for small. So it's the smallest vertebrae. We have 7 cervical vertebrae. We have 12 thoracic vertebrae. And we have in these thoracic vertebrae are the vertebrae that articulate with our 12 pairs of ribs. So if you remember how many ribs we have, you'll remember how many thoracic vertebrae we have. And then we have 5 lumbar vertebrae for 24 total vertebrae. So we have 24 ribs, right? 12 pairs. We have 24 vertebrae, right? 12 of those articulate with our pairs of ribs. And then 7 plus 5, 7 cervical vertebrae and 5 lumbar vertebrae. 7 plus 5 equals 12. So 12 plus 12 is 24. So just know when we're talking about ribs or vertebrae, the key things to remember are 12 and 24. 24 pairs of ribs, 24 ribs total. 12 pairs of ribs, 24 ribs total, 24 vertebrae total. Now, on the distal end of the vertebrae, meaning distal means most distant from the heart, we have a structure that is part of our pelvis, and that's the sacrum. And that's right on the posterior side of the body. And inferior of the sacrum is the coccyx, and that's an internal tailbone. So our vertebral column has 24 vertebrae, the same number of ribs. Got that? Cool. Now, the cervical vertebrae and thoracic vertebrae and lumbar vertebrae are all really distinctive. There's 2 vertebrae I want you guys to memorize. The vertebrae that connects to the skull on the top of the vertebral column, or in other words, the very first vertebrae, and that's called the C1 vertebrae. So not only do you have 24 vertebrae, and you have 3 different categories of vertebrae, but each category has a letter code. So cervical, spelled C-E-R-V-I-C-A-L, begins with the letter C, thoracic begins with the letter T, and lumbar begins with the letter L. So you have 7 C1, you have for your cervical vertebrae, the code for each vertebrae goes from C1 to C7. For your thoracic vertebrae, the code for each vertebrae, counting from the top to the bottom, goes from T1 to T12. And for your lumbar vertebrae, the code for them, counting from the top to the bottom, is L1 to L5. Now, if a person breaks their back, if you will, or gets a severe injury to their spinal column near the cervical vertebrae, typically that may result in complete paralysis of their arms and their legs. If a person has a spinal injury in their lumbar vertebrae, a severe one, it may result in paralysis of just their legs. So these are important vertebrae. Important to know which ones if you're in the health field. So back to cervical vertebrae. How many are there? 7. And the codes for each one individually is C1, C2, C3, all the way to C7, counting from the top down. The first vertebrae, C1, is called the atlas. The atlas is a unique vertebrae. None of the other vertebrae are like it. It has no body. It's like a circle with two holes, a little top hole, and a large foramen in the center that wraps around your nerves, your spinal cord. It's like a ring, and it articulates with the occipital condyles or yes joint of the skull. It allows you to nod your head up and down. The occipital condyles, if you recall, are those two little kidney-shaped pads of bone on either side of the foramen magnum. So let me show you what that is. All right, so I just did a Google search for occipital condyle on Google Images. And so your atlas has little facets, and it kind of fits right over these occipital condyles. They're on the interior edge of your foramen magnum. The foramen magnum is that hole that the spinal column connects to your brain. So, and it's on the interior side edge of that. So it's, in other words, these occipital condyles are on the left and right side in the kind of front edge in between the foramen magnum hole and a person's, palatine and facial bones. So that's what that is, occipital condyles. Now, C2 is another vertebrae, and it's called the axis. It has a little part sticking up called a dens, and this is called the node joint, and it allows you to shake your head. All right, so I'm going to risk crashing Zoom again, but this is the box on my screen is the C1 vertebrae. And then on the left, and the C2 vertebrae or axis. Oh, there I did again. Is on the vertebrae on the right. And you see that little protuberance? That is your node joint, and that fits into that hole of the axis, that small hole. So it allows you to nod your head. Turn your head from side to side, or no. So let's go here. Whoops. Crash Zoom again. Okay, this is getting to be the worst Zoom video ever. And there we go. May have to re-record this.